Good morning, students. Today, in lecture number 7, we are going to discuss the another section of William Wordsworth. Initially, we have studied in detail William Wordsworth's concept of poetic diction. And at the same time, this unit is also divided into the two sections. First, we have seen concept of poetic diction, and now today we will discuss in detail the concept of poetry. Both the concept of poetic diction and concept of poetry are correlated with each other. In the previous concept of poetic diction, we have studied in detail the very selection of language, the language of lower and middle class, the incident situations, the very language which according to Wordsworth seem very philosophical, permanent. And now after the very object, principal object, purpose, selection and recommendation of the language, we will move to the second section, concept of poetry. How the concept of poetry established or began, that Wordsworth very well expresses by giving the definition of poetry. According to William Wordsworth, when any poet writes poetry, it has many steps, because whenever any poet, according to William Wordsworth, moves, make a round anywhere, whatever he sees, he captures the memories, he captures these images, beauty, scenario in his memory. He, in short, we say, he stores in his memory, mind, we can say, he catches the images. And what happens when he writes poetry? At the time, some issues forcefully, accidentally, suddenly, spontaneously came in his mind, and he writes. And at the same time, the similar issues related to this spontaneity, which were already stored in his mind, they came ahead in front of his memory. So the spontaneity and the scenario which he has seen, he recollects, and he saw in ट्रॉन्क्विलिटी, एकांतवासात जे त्यांनी काय पाहिलेलं असते आणि एकदम एखाद्या विषयावर त्याला एकदम पोएट्री सुचलेली असते, त्या दोन्हीचा मिलाप करून तो पोएट्री लिहितो, असं वर्ड्सवर्थ म्हणतो. बिकॉज व्हेन यू गो थ्रू द W. Beat's poem Adam's Curse, W. Beat was a well-known British Irish poet. He has written so many poems. The Second Coming, Easter 19 says, The Tower, Prayer to His Daughter, and Irish Airman, Portige's Death. Like so many poems. In Adam's Curse, he says, before the Adam's curse to the human or to the Adam, he was totally free from any type of work. For the routine of bread, butter, he has no need to work. For the lovers, for love making, no need to any hard work. He easily gets the love, and the same time he talks about in the case of poets, because before the Adam's curse, the pollution of garden, Eden or paradise, everyone was free, even poet was. He easily writes the poems. But after the Adam's curse, W. Beat says that the poet has worked hard to write the poetic lines, Maybe it takes week, months, years for the writing poetry, and if he decides or if happens accidentally within one day also he write, or it will take 1 year also. So according to W. Bates, it takes a lot of work. So in the case of concept of poetry, when we go through it, Wordsworth defines very well the, we can simply say, the poetry's division. And according to him, he says, to begin with the issue of concept of poetry, Wordsworth simply say, good poetry is, when he defines poetry, he defines poetry, or while defining poetry or the concept of poetry, he simply says the spontaneous overflow spontaneous एकदम without any pre-planned thought, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, in which case there is no difference between it and the song of Shelley's Skylark. He says he was firm with, when we write the poetry, the poet firms with the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. At the same time, he further says that when he makes to explain the attempt of the poetry, he simply says that I have said poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, or he further says or discusses the concept of poetry. He simply says that in another word, same pattern. The poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Which the poet couldn't stop, and such powerful feelings which appear spontaneously in the mind of the poet, in the brain of the poet, he couldn't stop to come it out. So this poetry is the spontaneous overflow which एकदम freely बाहर spontaneously flowing of which the powerful feelings. So remember the spontaneous, then overflow, then the powerful feelings. So the powerful feelings, and he further says it takes its origin from emotions, recollected in tranquility. Because how it originates, because he divides this definition of poetry, how poetry according to him is the spontaneous overflow, right, of which the powerful feelings, and further it takes its origin from the emotions recollected in where tranquility means isolatory, ekant, solitary place. Tranquility means ekanta. So this way, according to William Wordsworth, poetry is divided, and then the poetry becomes, how the poetry becomes or came into exist, or came into writing, he says it has some steps, and the steps like the poetry, when the poet tried to write it, he couldn't write as and when he decided, but the requirement of the spontaneous overflow. Accidentally, suddenly, when the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings came in mind on any subject, he starts for the writing. And then what will happen? It takes its origin, means how he also mixed in it the emotions recollected in writing. So anything which he has seen stored in his mind, he gets the recollections found similar to that subject, then he starts for the writing. So this is the definition of the poetry, how came into exist. And further he says that when he talks in detail about these poetry, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, it takes its origin in emotions recollected in tranquility. After that, he says the steps about this definition of poetry, how they begin, how they work while defining the poetry. He just discusses the steps and the creation of the, we can say, the poetry's array. He divides it and he further says the emotions is, he further says the emotion is contemplated till. How long the emotion contemplates? The word contemplate till by a species of reaction. By a species of reaction. Means when these emotions contemplated means emotion recollected in tranquility. एकांत वासाच्या भावना लक्षात येतात जे त्यांनी पाहिलेले असतात त्याबद्दल तो बोलतो. The emotion is contemplative. How long the emotion remains by a stage of reaction, he says the tranquility ekantvas gradually disappears. The tranquility gradually disappears. Means slowly and slowly the graduation means tranquility disappears. एकांतवासात जे काही सुचलेलं असतं तो निघून जातो आणि जे स्पॉन्टेनियसली जे पॉवरफुल फिलिंग्स आणि एकांतवासातल्या ज्या गोष्टी आहेत तो एकत्र करून तो लिहिण्याचा प्रयत्न करतो. आता एकांतवास जातो तर एकांतवासातलं काय करतो? The emotions he collects when how long the tranquility disappears. इमोशन्स जे एकांतवासातले आता तो घेतो आणि ट्रान्क्विलिटी बाजूला काढतो. And emotion, tranquility gradually disappears and an emotion kindred to that which was before the subject of contemplation, and emotions attached with the subject which the spontaneously arrives in the mind of the poet. And this way is gradually produced and does itself actually exist in the mind. Whatever actually exists, because we again say emotion kindred to that what was before the subject of, kindred to what was the subject of contemplation. एकांतवासातला जो काही विषय आहे तो स्टेप बाय स्टेप how the whole things he says contemplation and produce does itself actually exist in the mind. Contemplation and does itself actually exist in the mind. So, my dear students, the poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It's originated in emotions recollected in tranquil. These two steps he divides, but further he bifurcates each and everything and how he comes to the actual writing. He says the emotions which were recollected tranquilly, he says they contemplated it, how long they will keep in mind, keep in his memory by a stage of reaction. Yes? The tranquility gradually disappears. Emotions recollected in tranquility, emotions remains, tranquility disappears. And further he says, emotion kindled what the subject of contemplation means. Emotions which were he recollects in the tranquility, they attached with the subject which he forcibly found, spontaneously found, and the same exists in the mind. Means that emotion, force, step by step, they create their place in the mind. Then Wordsworth says, because when he talks about the concept of poetry, he defines in detail the concept, the definition of poetry. Because wherever you go, how the definition of poetry that William Wordsworth has created, that is always applicable. And further he says that spontaneous, he says, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions recollected in tranquility. This is the definition of poetry. He again further elaborates. How he elaborates, for what he elaborates, that also I am going to tell you in detail. Right? When he talks about the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, one issue. Second, and emotions recollected in tranquility. These two things altogether, joined altogether, then the poetry begins. He says, both the things, according to William Wordsworth, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, when it occurs, we don't know, at any time, at any moment, the feelings came in the mind of the poet spontaneously, right? And the second thing, emotions recollected in tranquility, which were already stored in his mind, which he has seen sometime, somewhere, at some place, but that images are stored in his memory, and so the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, one thing. Secondly, emotions recollected in tranquility, the other thing, both are opposite to each other. But while writing the poetry, his spontaneously feelings, he mixed with the earlier, previous, past recollections and writes the poetry. So these two opposite things, according to the poet, the one means the one, but I am narrating double, repeating you, the one coming of a sudden means this one, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. How these feelings come? The feelings come spontaneous means we can say suddenly, without any background, without any thought, without any, we can say the plan. So the both are opposite to each other. The first come suddenly, on a sudden, the other deliberately recollected to memory. And the other thing means the poet has to bring think about it, and deliberately means पोएटला जाणून बुजून विचार करून त्या गोष्टी स्ट्रेस देऊन आणाव्या लागतात आणि फर्स्ट सरळ येतात आणावं लागतात मीन्स he has to stress a lot to his mind to recollect the things which he has seen somewhere, someplace, sometime ago in the past. So recollected in tranquility were already stored, so he has to brought it deliberately म्हणजे जाणून बुजून ते आणावं लागतात. And the first suddenly comes means both are opposite to each other according to Wordsworth. And Wordsworth makes no difference between the two, though they are opposite to each other, because between the two endeavors to explain the one by other, means one after other they come and they make the poetry. So both are interconnected or relevant or dependent with each other. Did he make that thing by the two? If it did, appears from the elucidation of the first statement by the second, his meaning in the first since we have been that poet. Because the first is dependent on the other, and one comes suddenly, one is the deliberately, but both are required for the purpose of poetry. So he further says, poetry is the final product. He says poetry is the final product of the poetry is the final product number one of the unforced. Unforced means suddenly comes. Poetry appears suddenly. Poetry is the final product. कशाचं final आहे creation? The unforced. Unforced means without any force the feelings come. Unforced. Further he says overflow of powerful feelings. Unforced overflow of powerful feelings. One, poetry is the final product of the unforced overflow of feelings, for it is only by such some interpretation that these two opposite statements can be reconciled. Means poetry is the sudden appearance of the powerful feelings, and the second is the deliberately remembered forced mind to recollect the things which he has seen. Means one is the suddenly happens, one is the deliberately recollected. Means जाणून बुजून मेमरीत आणले जातं forcefully. So one is the forced spontaneous overflow, the other is the forced recollection of the experiences, things, emotions. So this way he says finally the poetry is the final product of unforced overflow of powerful feelings, not of the recollected in the tranquility. Means not of the emotions recollected, because that is just he gives the background to that unforced powerful feelings in a background way, in a such scenario, in a color of imagination. He just adds to it. But poetry is, according to William Wordsworth, the powerful product of the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. That he says firmly. So this is little bit about the concept of poetry that this William Wordsworth want to say, want to define, want to narrate, and after that he talks about the recollected in tranquility. Means the emotions which he recollected in the tranquility, how he adds in the poetry that he in detail talks in the poems. So with this definition of the poetry, I stop here. Tomorrow we will discuss again the concept of poetry in a detailed way and manner. Thank you very much.